Hi, this is James Roney, founder of First Choice College, and we are here on our First Choice College Tips podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have on a longtime friend, Kevin Phillips. Kevin is the all-time leading scorer in Milford basketball history, so I looked up to him. We didn't overlap in high school. He graduated just as I went in, but his father was my track coach. His father was actually my father's track coach, and I went to high school with his brother. But I've also followed his career in college admissions. He went, coached and worked in admissions at Sacred Heart. And then from there, he went to the University of New Haven. And now he's at Lee's McRae in North Carolina. So Kevin, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, hi, James. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And so the first thing I really want to talk about is test optional. I think one of there had been momentum, and it was typically prior to the pandemic, it was smaller liberal arts colleges that were going test optional. And now we've actually seen a lot of state schools going test optional, with UConn, University of Connecticut in our area being one of them, the University of California system probably being the most notable. But what do you see, with the future of test optional? Do you see any colleges as returning to requiring the test, or how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, it's a real interesting topic, and it was, as you mentioned, even before COVID-19 struck. A lot of schools were starting to consider going that route, sometimes just to be more inclusive in their student body. But COVID obviously caused some people just to not take the test because of the lack of availability of taking the test. So I think there are some schools that are on the fence on whether they would want to come back and offer that as an option again. Now, we have, as an example, at Lee's McRae here in North Carolina, our honors program has always required a test score to enter. And last year was the first year we did not. But this year we're going back, as you have to have 2 of 3 criteria, one being a test score. And then NCAA Division II, obviously Division I athletics as well, has always required a test score. And it's my understanding that they probably will go back to requiring that again in the future. So you may see some certain populations of students that are still going to have to take the test. And then there are schools that still offer some merit awards for good, strong test scores. So I think you're going to see a mix, to be honest with you. I think some people are just going to say, hey, it's too much of a challenge to weed through all of this, and they may just say, hey, we're test optional. And some schools like us will reward a strong test score even though we're optional. And I think we have to adjust back, for a population of students like that, honor student or the potential Division II athlete, or we're Division II here at least.
Okay, and you bring up a good point. The difference between test blind and test optional, in that, I think I've heard only around 60 colleges in the country that are test blind, meaning that they won't look at your scores even if you submit them. So even with a lot of the test optional colleges, as you've mentioned, sometimes there's a specific program that may require a test score. Sometimes, and it usually can help you. A good score can help you, right? And or it could help with merit aid. It sounds like, and a lot of schools, I think, have still tied the test scores to their merit aid.
Yeah, some of them have, and even when we review file here, we're still giving a strong score some consideration. I mean, there's so many different factors involved in the process. I mean, it's kind of that holistic review that, originally when the common application started, that was the whole intent of it, is give you a holistic review, but that included a test score in addition to your grades, an essay, a letter of recommendation, extracurricular, things like that. So I think what's happening now, just the market has so many challenges in it. I think schools are trying, especially, the small private schools, but also some of these large state schools, they just don't want to have any type of hindrance to a student applying. So I think it's situational a little bit. And I think that everyone has an opinion on it. I mean, there's data that shows sometimes the test score does indicate a good indicator of how you're going to do in college. And then there's some other data that shows it's the grades. But it also depends on what classes you've taken, what level classes you've taken. So I think there's still relevance to students submitting test scores, and a lot of times they will get recognized. So if someone's saying, oh, I'm not wasting my time, because as you mentioned a minute ago, there's very few that are test blind. So the optionals are saying, hey, if you have a good score, that can help you get into a program. It can help get you some additional merit aid. It could even perhaps give you more indicator of your overall success in college. So I think we almost have to wait this out a little bit, unfortunately, but we're going to have a little more weight put on that test score this year than we did last year, simply because more people were able to take it. So the honors program, while they're not going to force a student to have it here, it is one of the three choices. They have to have two of the three to apply to our honors program. Whereas last year we just used the GPA and the academic rigor. So I hope that made sense, because a lot of schools are having a similar conversation. And I think some schools do it because their enrollment is down, and some schools are doing it to try to diversify their student body in different ways.
And that is, I think, one of the benefits. We've seen a lot of schools have been able to admit a more diverse class, right? In regards to all types of diversity, admitting more women, admitting more first generation college students, more minorities. And so there have definitely been benefits. I would say one thing I wonder about is, given the fact that a lot of high schools have grade inflation, what are you using for some form of a common measuring stick in lieu of the SAT or the ACT?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you have seen a difference. There's such a difference. And, I've been here 2 years now at Lee's McRae, and North Carolina's school systems are different than Connecticut's school system. So you have to look at the transcripts, and, a lot of times, students may say they're taking an honors class, but how they're doing in that honors class and should they be in that honors class is up for debate sometimes. And same thing, honestly, with AP classes, they can be taught at different levels. So that's why that standardized test at the end of the AP does indicate, you take that AP test and you don't get a 3 or a 4 or a 5, it almost was like not worth even taking the class. So at the end of the day, I think that, we will look at the student's essay, and it's an interesting topic, because there's more schools that are quote unquote waiving the essay now as well. And that caught me off guard last year when I saw that. And I won't tell you which schools, but when I saw it, they were saying it was a benefit of applying early. Now here at Lee's McRae, we're taking the essay seriously, and we even have a small scholarship for a strong essay that we add on to a merit award because we feel that's very important. Writing skills are diminishing, so to waive an essay is really not a good thing. But you can learn a lot about a student and see some of their ability to succeed in college through that essay. As far as a letter of recommendation is concerned, those are almost obsolete at this point, because specifically with COVID, a lot of the teachers and counselors didn't even really get to know the students to write them a real letter of recommendation. So some schools are going optional on letters of recommendation. And then, some schools are even requiring like the newer test, the classic learning test, which we're not going to use, but it's out there. Some people obviously will take the ACT over the SAT. So I think it's a combination. And when you're test optional, if you don't have a great score, the essay is something that we will look at. And also the rigor of what you've taken in school, where you took it, what level it was, and things like that. So I hope I made sense there. There's just a lot of different factors involved, and it's not as straightforward as it was 20 years ago. It's like you had your SAT score, you had your grades, you had your essay, you had your letter of recommendation, you pull them together and you're in or you're out. Our job is in the admission world, at least, here, we still want to make sure a student's going to be successful and not just admit a student to admit a student. There's enrollment challenges at some schools, so sometimes they'll put students in that maybe aren't ready for it. And that becomes a challenge for someone that's in my role as a vice president for enrollment. We still have to enroll a class, but not at all costs. We happen to be in a pretty good financial situation compared to some of the small privates that you may see out there. So I think it depends on the school, but long answer to your question is I think that a holistic review is important, and sometimes an interview will work, whether you do it virtually or in person. I think you can get a lot out of a student by having a conversation with that particular student. We have a Scholars Day here every February where students who were admitted to our honors program actually come to campus and compete for 2 full tuition scholarships. And part of that is an essay competition that they write on the spot, and they're not given the prompt in advance. So that way the critical thinking skills are really coming out. And the second component is interviewing with 2 of our faculty members So can you communicate effectively verbally, but put on paper as well? It's like, can you defend the point that you just put on a piece of paper? And obviously a lot of students did come and compete for that because it had a financial benefit. But I think that also ties into how you can use a holistic review, and not just look at the grades, not just look at the test score, and see the differences between schools and make sure that student will be successful at a particular college or university.
Now you mentioned, the holistic review. You mentioned rigor. How are you determining the rigor of a student's curriculum, and what's your advice to a student just starting off their high school experience in their freshman year?
Yeah, it involves really looking at the transcript and looking at the profile of the high school to see what they're offering. What is their rigor, meaning how many honors classes can the student take? Do they have IB courses, International Baccalaureate? Do they have advanced placement courses? And then, the push on a lot of high schools is to get as many of those in as you can. Here in North Carolina, it's a huge dual enrollment state. So we've got a lot of students that are simultaneously earning their high school diploma at the same time they're earning an associate's degree from a community college in Carolina. So they're really literally coming in with 6 credits completed. And that's a whole new game that you do see a little bit of that up in the Northeast, but it was really a heavy emphasis here in North Carolina. That being said, that doesn't mean all of those students are prepared for college, because they may just be signing up to check a box. So we're going to look at what type of courses the student took, where they took those courses, what the passing grade of the high school is. Some of them are as high as 75 and some are as low as 60. So there's a big difference. If we can get to 75 in chemistry at one school and a 60 at the other, is it the same? Is it taught at a different level? And sometimes it's hard to get to that, but it's the best tool that we have as admission professionals of seeing, did the student prepare themselves? Did the student challenge themselves? And if it was advice, I don't think it's going to penalize the student if they don't take honors courses. I mean, we will give some weight to honors courses. It may give you additional scholarships, but from an admission standpoint, just taking honors classes to say you took honors classes, probably not going to benefit you. But if you are of that caliber, certainly can differentiate you if you challenge yourself. If you took any college level courses from any particular, even if it's a 4-year school, I know UConn and other schools have always done pre-college programs. And I would always say that's a good idea to get some of that on your resume. It really looks like you're preparing yourself well. So anything you can do to differentiate yourself as a potential student. And I'd also add, I wouldn't stress out too much about it. I've talked to a lot of people recently who I went to high school with. Their kids are now going to school. So they're asking me about the essay. They're asking me about letters. They're asking me about visiting. And at the end of the day, I told them, hey, it's all important. But the worst thing people can do is panic and stress out, because there's a lot of colleges out there, and trying to find that right place for you is not simple. And here's a great point. Lee's McRae is not a household name. In fact, I hadn't even heard of it until I had the job here. And what we did is we really had to increase the brand awareness of the school. And we can get into that in a minute, but there's a lot of cool things to a small school. But where you're in North Carolina, people know Duke, they know Wake Forest, they know UNC Chapel Hill, they know NC State, et cetera. Such a High Point, Elon. These are names that people know. There's about 15 to 20 other schools in North Carolina that kind of are those hidden gems that have unique programs. So, I think searching through the process and not panicking is probably the best advice I would give to people.
Now, you talk a little bit about GPA. Now I have a question, because all high schools seem to be on a completely different system. So I have 2 questions. One common thing parents ask is, do you look at weighted or unweighted GPA? And then the other question I have for you is, given the fact that so many high schools are on different systems, like, from back when you were in Connecticut, right? A North Haven High School had a very different than a Jonathan Law, then Amity had a GPA and a QPA. Do you have to recalculate GPA to put everyone on the same footing? If so, are you only looking at certain classes, right? Are you not looking at the non-core classes? Are you only looking at core classes? And how many years of course are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, James. I mean, I think that over the years it's changed. I mean, I think correct me if I'm wrong, when we were in high school, it was pretty much on that 4.0 scale. And if you had honors, you could get up to a 4.5, and it was pretty crystal clear how it worked. And over the years, I think a lot of school systems have changed it. And quite frankly, they're trying to benefit their students. And so we typically will look at the weighted GPA, but there's an asterisk next to that. If somebody has a regular GPA of a 2.5 and a weighted of a 4.0, now there's a big discrepancy there. You have to kind of do that transcript evaluation. And so at least McRae anyway, and when I was at New Haven and also Sacred Heart, at the time that I worked at those schools, we weren't really looking at just core. We were kind of looking at the overall. There's an increase in students who've taken some of those unique areas like psychology or forensic science or forensic psychology or something like that. While they're typically not part of the core, they're still real challenging, interesting classes. So we want to penalize a student who took an off-the-grid class that's a legit class and did well without. But we'll look at the overall GPA. Now, that being said, if you're applying to a tougher major, like we have nursing here, we have wildlife biology, stuff like that. You don't want to set the student up for failure. So sometimes we'd look at core. You could have A's in health, and you have a C in algebra and a D in a U.S. history and stuff like that. So I think it depends on the program of study that the student would go into. A lot of schools still just accept the student to the college first. We, similar to when I was at New Haven, will allow the student to pick the major, or they can come in as undecided. And I think it does depend a little bit on that. So we'll be looking at a lot of different factors when it comes to that. But do we recalculate it? We do if we need to. For the most part, we don't want to penalize the student for going to a particular high school. So when you look at that passing grade and what that rigor is and what they've taken, if they're unweighted as a 3.8 and the weight is a 4.3, we're probably going with the 4.3. But there are times that we would, look at if we need to recalculate it, and sometimes we will do that. And we do consider all the classes in that would be considered like an acceptable class at the college level, and that would even include subjects, like a Latin, for example, where we offer a couple of modern languages here as minors, but we don't offer Latin, but we wouldn't penalize the student for taking Latin if they were doing that. So hope that made sense. I mean, I think a lot of schools do things a lot differently. There are schools that will just use core GPA. They will recalculate the GPA, put it on their scale. If we have a numeric GPA, we have a scale that we created that matches Lee's McRae. So if somebody has like an 81, there's some schools that might put that in as a 3.0. Some will put it in as a 2.7, which is kind of where we do it, kind of like that B- school range. But we'll also look at that profile of the school to make sure it's kind of matching a little bit. Because some of them, as you just alluded to, they're all over the board a little bit. So it's not a standard, hey, this is how we're going to do it. We will be a little bit more holistic on that process and make sure that we're understanding what the student did to challenge himself or herself, what school they went to, what was offered at that school, how the GPA was calculated. Is it a GPA that's on a 4.0 scale? There's some that are on 5.0 scales, that are some are on 7. So when they get to that, that's when we recalculate. So I hope that made sense. It's kind of how we do it. And some of my colleagues in the field are doing the same thing. Others will just use core GPA. And I think it depends on how competitive the school is. If you're talking, some of the most competitive schools, they have a way that they could dig down into the trenches and see exactly, hey, the student got this in this particular class. That's not good enough. We even look at that. If you're going into one of the tougher majors, even at a school like Lee's McRae, tendency might be that they take a lot of people just because they need the enrollment. We don't need the enrollment. We're full. So we're trying to be a little more selective. And our average GPA is a 3.7 in common class. So it's not a bad thing. And I probably wouldn't have expected that, to be honest with you, until I was working here. So looking at the different schools is also important. Seeing what they're requiring is important. And then just doing the very best you can in the classes that you take in high school is the advice I give people.
Great. Now, just to talk, we talked about the importance of the essay. Right. And it seems that it's been probably elevated in importance, except that, those schools obviously that have waived it, it's not that important there. But I think for a lot of the other schools, especially I would say at state schools, when in the past used to rely more heavily on, GPA and SAT or GPA and ACT, they're now test optional. So I think they're looking at the essay. Can you give us an idea of what what you think would make a good essay. And if you have an example of one of your favorite essay, I don't know if you still actually read the files, or if you're just doing for the consistency, like a final review, but.
Yeah, I mean, as the vice president, I'm not actually reviewing too many files, but I have stepped in when there was a period of time where we were getting quite a few applications. So I did read a few this year, and when I was at the University of Haven, I did help out reviews. So I've seen all different types of essays. Obviously, the common application has the essay topics. We have developed some topics. If you used McRae has its own application, and we're part of the Common App. And while I'm talking about that, I just say anybody who's listening, if the school is on the Common App, there is a benefit to using the Common App. You can apply to multiple colleges and universities using one application. The stipulation that I'd add is make sure that you look in the member questions area. Each of those colleges may have a specific major that you have to apply to, or an honors program you have to apply to. So even though you're using one application, if you use 5 or 6 colleges, they may have an additional requirement. That's the key thing. But there's no weight given one way or the other. Our application for McRae is a simple one. I'd say we probably, let's see if I get this right, 75% of our students used our application, and the other 25 used the Common App this particular year. But it doesn't matter one way or the other. So I think it's important for people to realize that when you're applying, there's several things that they can do. As far as the essay, we're not going to be grading it necessarily as a research or a term paper, but it is pretty important that you use proper grammar, punctuation, structure, things like that. So we want someone that put a little bit of time into writing that essay. I think some people spend a lot of time stressing over it. I wouldn't stress over it, but I wouldn't just write one paragraph and say, hey, this is what I'm here and you're going to accept me. One of the interesting things is that we also allow a student to write about anything that they would like to. And sometimes if someone is struggling to find a topic, or they didn't want to write about, a failure, that was always a topic that people tell us about, a recent failure. I think that there's so much going on in the world. We don't really want to force people into that negative mindset. How do you turn the negative into the positive is a good story, but there's always a challenge that's out there. I think those stories are important. Someone who perseveres. I think that, if you're just totally unsure of what to write about, talking about what you might be interested in studying, why you're looking at that particular college. It's interesting at McRae, we cross applications with Appalachian State University, similar to what we did at New Haven, where the University of Connecticut was the top cross app. But if you really, really think about that, a student really shouldn't be looking at a school of 20,000 students and a school of 1,000 students, but they do from the location standpoint. We're about 25 minutes away from Appalachian State, so they've got 20,000 students just a little bit further down the mountain here. But we get a lot of kids that apply to both schools. And I think, there's people that are hesitant sometimes about small schools. They think there's not enough people. And I told a family this year, I said, well, let me put it this way. You think it's too small? How many friends do you have? And the kid struggled with that. He said, oh, that's a good question. I said, what do you got? 20, 30, 40? I mean, that's probably a lot if you really think about it. And I said, you're not going to know everybody even at the small school like McRae. So you've got to find the fit for you. Can you use the facilities? Do you know the faculty members? Can you get something out of the class? Can you have experiential learning opportunities? Can you do that at the large school? Of course you can. But sometimes you have to be the right student that sits in the front row of that lecture hall or goes to the seminar that's on a Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock. So I think sometimes people pick the smaller schools for a reason. And where I'm going with this is you can write about that. Why are you looking at a school? What are you hoping to get out of the school? What are you hoping to be doing 5 years down the road? And how do you think your education can prepare you for that? Those are pretty good topics to write about because they're relating the decision that the student is making to the process that they're going through. And it looks like the school will have a good feel on whether that student would be a good fit for them. So that was just a suggestion. But we've seen all different types of essays. There was one particular that kind of hit home with me because I always remember my grandfather was a proud World War II veteran. And, as I was growing up, he was my mom's dad and he lived a mile from our house. And he went to every single one of my high school basketball games at home. He didn't miss a game. And, thinking about the reason he did is he had 2 daughters. So I was like the son that he never had. And somebody wrote a similar essay that their grandfather was like this great role model for them. He was always there for them. He was always helping fix things at the house. So, that was something too. How did you become the person that you are? And it might have influences in your life. Coaches can be a big influence in people's lives. And sometimes you don't realize that until 20, 25 years later. But writing about something like that is hard to do when you're in the moment. But that could be a good one too. Who is somebody you want to emulate and things like that. So I think there's a lot of topics. If someone was struggling and the school offered that option, and the Common App has always offered the option of writing about any topic, what you're looking to study, what type of school you're looking at, what do you hope to get out of the school, who's a good role model for you. I love that one. I think they always learn something from someone, and whether that's your parents or a teacher or a coach or a friend or an employer. I think we all forget sometimes how much influence we have on each other. And so writing about something like that, I think is kind of a cool idea.
Great. Any examples of an essay that you read that should not have been written, right? Any topics that students should avoid, or even if it's not a topic, a voice, a way that they present an essay that students should avoid?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've seen multiple students do, and I don't know where they're getting this from, but I've seen this at New Haven and even back in the 90s when I worked at Sacred Heart University, and even today at Lee's McRae, it's like a chronological life history. There's not a lot of them, but they just start listing it out. And some of them go so far as I was born in 2003. And, I had a couple of other brothers and sisters, and then we were in the Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, and we were in the band. And, if you really stop and think about that, that's not an essay. That's a list of chronological history of your life.
Yeah, it's a prose resume, right?
Yeah. So I would probably say to avoid that, because I've never seen a college admission officer that will grade one of those highly. But if you do go down that road, trying to tie in the event of your life as to what you're looking at now, I think is at least somewhat, they talk about critical thinking and, those types of things, deductive reasoning, all of these kind of things that you learn in the core curriculum. But I think sometimes people forget about that when they're writing the essay. How do you tie the topic into what you're trying to convey the point? My dad, as you know, was an English teacher, so I've got this stuff drilled into my head. So when I do look at an essay, I'm kind of looking for the proper structure and things like that. But we also don't want to totally penalize a student if they're not perfect on that. So I think some schools, depending on how selective they are, can possibly grade that essay even at a higher level. But we make it a pretty decent point, and that's why we even have that small scholarship. Because if you think about it on the way out, whether you're going to grad school or a professional school or you're going to get a job, they're going to look at something that you wrote. Cover letters that just repeat the resume are no good. So that's why the essay that just repeats your life is probably not a good topic. I've seen that a lot. I think anything that you write about yourself is valid, but if it's an uncomfortable topic, there's a way to present that, as opposed to like giving specific examples. So I won't get into that with you on this, but there's a lot of things going on in the world that students will have some type of an impact on them, and they can write about that, but they just have to be careful. It shouldn't be totally your opinion, one way or the other. And I think that people should just think it through and try to tie it to a point that they're making, and how is it relevant to what they're doing now, and why they're looking at a particular school and how that school can help them get to where they want to go.
I think one thing that I seem to see from students is that they forget that the essay is not about an event. It's not about another person. It's about the student, right? And I think the best essays in my mind are, what's your why, right? They're telling us, as Simon Sinek would say, what's your why? They're telling us not just what they do, but why they do it. And as you say, how that ties into what they want to do going forward. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And, it's the same thing that we at the college level try to do. Why do you want to enroll here? Because it's like you go to a job interview, I think a lot of people sometimes just assume that the person that's interviewing is all in on the job, but you got to kind of like sell them on the place to work too. It's a two-way street. They're interviewing you, you're interviewing them. I think it's the same way for college admissions, quite frank. I mean, that's why people apply to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 schools. They don't know where they're going to end up. And, And so we're trying to admit students to the college here that are going to be good fits. We got to know a little bit about them. So tell us why, and we'll tell you why. I think it's a good point.
Speaking of that, college is like anything in life. You want someone who wants you. So are you guys looking at things like demonstrated interest when you're making an admission decision? And what types of things, if you are, what types of things are you looking at?
Yeah, we haven't actually done that. I mean, I know that some schools will, give you points for visiting the campus, and clearly that's an important thing to do. There are still some students that don't visit the college that they want to go to, and I experienced that firsthand with my younger daughter. She was planning to go. She actually is a sophomore at Lynn University, Boca Raton, Florida. She was looking for schools that had fashion programs, and she found a few, and she was fortunate enough to be accepted to all of them. So she had a little bit of a choice, but she signed up for their open house in March of 2020, and right at that time is when the shutdown occurred from COVID. So she actually had to do a virtual open house and decided to go there without physically stepping on that campus. So she still had that demonstrated interest, I guess, but she actually does like the school, but I think it's a little bit harder. And I know there's virtual platforms now, and we participate in that. Off on another little quick aside, we didn't close last year. So Lee's McRae was open the whole year, not only for in-person on-campus instruction, but we were open for campus visitors too. And I think that did help us. We obviously kept safety protocol in mind, but we're a smaller school, and I think that's why we were able to do it. But at the end of the day, we'll take a look at things, those extracurricular things, a list of accomplishments, achievements that the student has. That can make a difference in a lot of colleges, but we don't require that. And then obviously, if you visit the campus, you're much more likely to enroll. The yields here are phenomenally high. The average private school is still somewhere in the 12, 13, 14% range of how many accept versus how many enroll. Lee's McRae is like 35%. So wow. It's like we get a lot. And here's an interesting stat. We had a relatively small open house by comparison. We had 100 students attend our accepted student day. 94 of them came here. That's 94%. I have never seen that in 28 years in higher ed. Even at the great schools I worked at in Connecticut, the highest one we ever got was 82. So that shows how important it is to visit a campus, because I think if I was talking to people in the Northeast, right, they would go, Lee's who? So, but if they came to this campus, they would be surprised at how nice it is, how many academic programs we have, and even how the weather is going to be similar. Even though we're in North Carolina, we're in the mountains, an area where there's a ton of people though. And even Boone, which is where Appalachia State is, that reminds me of Milford, Connecticut. It's really pretty similar. And so you're in the mountains and also get into the city. And that's why it's important to visit. If you eliminate a school because of your perceived or your perception of that school, you may be costing yourself an opportunity. And it's the same thing with the essays and how you go about that admission process. I mean, I think a lot of people today, even more so than ever, are more and more nervous. I read an article the other day that was specifically geared to admission at the top schools, like the Ivy League schools and some of the real tough ones, like a Duke, right? But Duke is not Lee's McRae, it's not New Haven, it's not Sacred Heart, it's not even High Point. So there's so much of a false perception on how it all works. But at the end of the day, I think people would think Lee's McRae will let a poor student in. That's not true. And we don't have to. And so you getting things done early and thinking through the process will avoid that stress. I hope that made a little bit of sense, because at 28 years, you see a lot of things, and it's still happening. I mean, this whole thing, I don't think anybody was prepared for a pandemic.
No. And so you mentioned other schools, competitive college admissions. Something that's been in the news recently, and it turned out to be a hoax, was that Harvard rescinded an offer of admission because of a student's Twitter posts. This time that was a hoax, but I'm sure, there are, well, do you look at student social media posts, and would it be possible for a student that you would offer admission for you to rescind an offer of admission based on new information that came out through social media?
Yeah, there was a number of schools that as far back as 8, 9, 10 years ago had started to at least look at that. We actually don't. I think that it's something that we can teach people, social media responsibility. We would never, ever, rescind an admission because of an opinion or a particular affiliation or anything like that. But if there's something that's considered totally inappropriate, like we've had they've eliminated the question now, but the Common App always had like a disciplinary question. And, part of my responsibility is we want to make sure that a student is welcome regardless of their background. And also, I think that we need to make sure that people are not judged, unfairly. So it's kind of why we don't do it. If we were made aware of a situation where there was a law that was broken, that was really bad, we could. And as a private school, we could rescind admission. We typically won't do that, but there are situations that occur that I think people should be aware of. It's almost like employers, while they might not tell you straight out, they're going to check it out. There's ways to do background checks on people just to make sure they are who they say they are. And I think some colleges are looking at that. We literally are not. There hasn't been a reason to. And I think as a small school, we get a really good personal look at the student. We can call increase here, whereas even at New Haven, that was really hard to do because we had built New Haven up to be such a well-known entity in the Northeast. You just don't have the personal time. So here, I hope that's making sense. I think that it could happen, and I think students should have some social media responsibility. Obviously, most of them aren't even using Facebook anymore, but wherever they go, I've seen what my daughters do. They're not doing anything inappropriate, but some of it gets borderline. So, I think that you need to learn that just because it's your personal account and your opinion is that you can just post whatever you want on there, that's not necessarily the case. So I think I would just think before people post is kind of an important thing, because some schools could look at that even if they're not telling you they're looking.
And the other thing is employers down the road will
Absolutely
may look at it. So even if it doesn't make a difference for a school, it may in the long run harm you at when you're applying for your first job. So I think that's good advice to think before you post and be careful, because once things are out there, they're out there, and it could negatively follow. Yeah, you can't. Right, you can't take that back.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen, too many times. Even while you're in college, employers will typically give the student a pass on something they put in high school, but they very rarely will give them a pass on college. That's the time where you're really starting to look. And so, we have some courses here, and I assume a lot of schools probably added them on, social media. And even in our first year seminar class, which all freshmen have to take, they do them on themes. So it's kind of cool. They're not all doing the same curriculum, but there's a few standard points like academic advising. A lot of schools have gotten away from this. The students can't advise themselves. They literally don't know when they're 18 years old, what happens when you drop this class, or what happens when you want to add a minor and things like that. So yeah, some of them know, but not all of them know. So there's some topics that we cover in there, including social media responsibility. And, sometimes people feel they can put up whatever they want. And, I think it's gotten interesting out there what people put up, but your opinion doesn't necessarily mean you're right. And employers can choose to have somebody that's not going to cause controversy or not going to do illegal things or post inappropriate things. And while they may not tell you that's not why they gave you the job, it's something that you have to take a look at. So, starting now is important. It doesn't mean don't use social media, but, I think they need to be really careful. And that's just my opinion. Seen a lot of different things over these years that I've done this job. And I think just clarity is important, and thinking is important, and professionalism is important, even when they're in high school. When you're going to apply to college, you're not the only one applying. We deny students, right? Like, I think some people have this perception that small schools need the enrollment so much they take everybody. It's not true. We're probably about a 60% accept rate, which is lower than people would think. So it's not where the Ivies are, less than 10%, but that's because we don't get 25 or 30 or 40,000 applications. We have fewer. We have like 2,500. So it's small. But I would just encourage people to just don't stress. That's my theme. But think. I think thinking is something that not everybody does. They're just checking a box. Don't be a box checker. make yourself stand out.
Now, so you're giving advice. You mentioned before that your daughter, you have one daughter who is going into her sophomore year at Lynn. I believe your other daughter is she a rising senior at
Yes.
UNH?
Yes.
So you have two daughters who are current college students. What advice did you give to them when they were in high school on the college search?
I mean, they fortunately or unfortunately grew up with me working in the college enrollment world. So I think they had a different look at things. But I actually told them to make sure they took a look at more than one school, not too many schools. I've seen people that are applying to as many as 20 colleges. That's just doesn't do you any good. You're never going to really learn too much about them. So I would say 5 to 7 is my recommendation. It's actually what I did in 1987. I applied to 7 schools. I had other interests like basketball that was driving those factors. But I think if you apply to too many or you visit too many, they try to blur together. So one thing I told them is do your own research. And I really think they did. So my older daughter didn't go to New Haven because I was working there. She ended up liking the faculty in the program that she was interested more than the other final school that she was looking at. And I had visited that other school with her, and going into that visit, I think she wanted to go there. It was in a warmer climate. And at the end of the day, some of those schools push weather to Northeast kids. Hey, it's going to be warm down here in Florida or Georgia or even North Carolina and parts of it. And while that's all true, I think that what I gave her the advice of is while you may change your mind on what you major in, take a look at the academic programs, because you're plain and simple, that's the first and foremost reason you're out of school. I think people forget that. And then the student experience is also important. So what do the students do outside of the classroom? What's the living environment like? And so my advice was I wanted them to do it themselves. And I know that's hard for people, but I literally didn't get involved in it until they wanted to visit the schools, and then I obviously would take them. But the advice I would give is so many people are going to have an opinion. I would say don't predetermine the school that you want to go to. If you think UConn is for you, you should apply and you should visit. But don't limit yourself to just UConn. There might be a smaller school out there that might have things that you weren't even considering. And so seeing it from their perspective is real interesting, because I went to college fairs with them when we were still living in Connecticut, and to see it on that other side of what I've done for a living is real telling. And so I always tell the parents who visit, I totally get where they're coming from and what they're going through. Even to this point, I'm the guy that requires my daughters to do their own paperwork, because they're not going to have dad doing it when they get a job. And I know everybody's different on that approach. But even after my older daughter has gone through this a few times, she still has to be given a nudge to do what she's supposed to do. And that's kind of like when you register for classes, when you sign up for your residence hall for the following year, financial aid paperwork. It's not just a one-time thing, it's a yearly thing. And I think that that's the advice I would give to people. Pay attention to your email, because a lot of times colleges will communicate to you via email, and you probably don't use your email. So I would say, if it's a school you're seriously considering, look at the email, because once you take like a PSAT or you get your name on a list like an NRCCUA, National Research Center for College and University Admission, you're going to get a ton of email. I mean, and that's what I saw. I mean, they literally had 200 colleges emailing them. And so it's hard to sift through that. And I think it's hard for the colleges to realize, well, you're not the only one sending them. So you need to stand out as well. Try to attract attention to each of the audiences is kind of important. And I said the demonstrated interest is important, whether you get points for it or not at the college. I mean, you're not going to know about the college if you don't show some interest in it. And, they got involved in some things and they both are happy where they are. So I think that's the best advice I could give. Be yourself and don't eliminate schools until you've given them a chance, and try to find the best place for you. It may not be the place that you thought it was going to be, but at the end of the day, you got to be happy with your decision, and there's nothing wrong with any of those colleges. I mean, everybody's got something great to offer students. You just got to find out if that fits what you're looking for.
That's great. Great advice. So I want to shift now to talk a little bit about Lee's McRae. So a lot of colleges struggled this year, to didn't admit as many students, or they admitted students, but they didn't matriculate, right? So they're looking at smaller incoming freshman classes. That's not true for you, right? You have a record incoming class. What do you think was the key to that?
That is a true statement. Lisa McRae was founded in 1900. Last year, we had our third biggest class, and this year we have our largest class. Honestly, the product can almost sell itself, but the school was not promoting the product outside of the general region. So once we just started to expand it, it's amazing how quickly you can attract people. We have some unique programs. We have a really unique location. And so it isn't going to be for everybody. But if someone's down in Charlotte, and Charlotte's a huge city of 1 million plus people, that's about 2 hours away from Lisa McRae. So it's not that far away, but the environment's completely different. You have to go up in elevation. Our campus is about 4,000 feet above sea level and happens to be the highest elevation of any college campus east of the Mississippi River. Now, once you're here, I don't think you know it. If I'm looking out the back window over here, there's a mountain called Beach Mountain, and then there's one this way called Sugar Mountain. Their elevations are 5,500 feet. It would take me 10 minutes in my car to drive to either one, and they are 1,500 feet further up in elevation. So if you don't like mountains, maybe Lisa McRae is not for you. But what I would say to somebody is it's a unique environment, and you don't necessarily feel like you're just in the mountains. Banner Elk, which is where the school is actually literally a 4-season tourist destination because we're in the mountains. We get snow in the winter, just like Connecticut. And there's 2 ski resorts here that they are considered the ski capital of the South. I couldn't believe how many people go to these places. It is packed like you wouldn't believe. So we have a ski industry business and instruction academic program. We have an outdoor recreation management program. We set up shop at some of those ski weekends. Weekends are just packed, and people would come over because honestly, it's all families. So there's kids from Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida visiting for the weekend because they like to ski. And you can't go skiing anywhere else down here. I mean, this is it. You got to get up into New England or Colorado before you're really skiing again. So that's a unique aspect. Then I would say to somebody, if you are worried about being in the middle of nowhere, just because so many people are around, Banner Elk's a small town, but it's got a lot of like restaurants and bars and things like that. But Boone is Milford, Connecticut, and you know Milford because you're there. And I was surprised at how eerily similar it reminded me of Milford, but it also has Appalachian State University with 20,000 students. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And then you got Charlotte 2 hours away. Asheville is an hour and a half away. So you're not, and Raleigh's about 3.5. So it's not totally off the grid to come here. And I think that was the biggest challenge that I had when I got here, was to just let people know where we were. The second thing is the price tag of Lisa McRae is on the low side of private schools. So our tuition's only $26,000 a year. The total cost is $40,000. You compare that to any school outside of this area, that's a bargain. And so we found that people who were strong students who are getting good merit scholarships and financial aid are going to really find Lisa McRae as an affordable private option. And honestly, we have under 1,000 students, James. So you're going to get the personal attention. All schools say they do it, but when I saw how they do it here, it's totally different than what I've seen before. You really get it here. And we do the experiential learning. I mean, we've got a wildlife biology major and a wildlife rehabilitation program and a pre-veterinary medicine major. It's a major. You graduate with that on your diploma. And after all the years I worked in enrollment, I didn't think you could do that, but North Carolina allows you to do that. And so we have a facility called the May Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, 1,500 roughly animals that are injured or sick or orphaned are cared for in that facility. And they have a surgical suite, they have an x-ray machine, they have an anesthesia machine. The students do diagnostic testing on the animals. So whether you go to be a primate keeper, an animal keeper, a bird rehabilitator, or you go to vet school, that's hands-on learning. And so we get people from all over the country coming for that program. So even a little tiny school, that's our marquee program. I think if you remember the University of New Haven, I think, maybe they've changed a little bit, but forensic science was their big thing. And we get people from everywhere. Wildlife biology here is New Haven's forensic science. And so we were able to grow that program. And we have others. I mean, outdoor rec management is a growing field. And it's something I learned. North Carolina has a $28 billion a year tourism industry. Only Colorado is higher in the United States. So the outdoor rec management program is a cool major. And they have outdoor certifications in ski patrol, wilderness first responder, wilderness EMT. So it's kind of really cool stuff that's unique. And of course, we have normal stuff. We have business administration, and we've got criminal justice, and we have psychology, we have English history, we have a religious studies program. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. And it reminds me of some of the other schools I worked at. We have some unique things that you can't find anywhere else. I mean, we have minors in athletic coaching, in cycling studies. We have a Division I cycling team. And to the best of my knowledge, it's the only cycling academic program in the country. Wilderness medicine is one of 3. Ski industry is one of like 6. So those are unique things that you can add and combine together, whether you major, minor, some of them are minors, but you could major in business or outdoor rec or sport management and get a minor in ski industry business, or you could get a minor in wilderness medicine. I mean, you're going to have a resume that just sets you apart. So I won't keep going on that because there's a bunch of other stuff. I mean, even musical theater is a program here. And, you know, all the years I worked in New England, a lot of people ask me about musical theater. So we actually have one here that's pretty well regarded in North Carolina. They have a costume shop that's like the largest in Western North Carolina, and people that have professional theater organizations come and rent the equipment out, or the gowns and the dresses and things like that. So pretty cool stuff.
That's cool. Now, what type of a student would do well at these McRae? So if someone's listening to this, who's someone who may not have thought of it before, who would probably end up doing well?
I think honestly, it's a small school, and we have some strategic plans to grow that enrollment, but it's not going to ever get to be a big school. I mean, we're talking, you know, probably 1,250 students to 1,500 students in the next 5 to 7 years, and that's probably going to be easy to do here because if you saw it, it's a huge campus. Actually, it's 465 acres, and it's got a lot of newer buildings mixed with older nostalgic buildings, and so. There's a waterfall on the campus. There's trails for cycling and hiking and things like that. So it's pretty interesting. But I would say the student would have to be wanting a small environment. They've got to want to be in a unique location. But if you were talking even specifically to people in the Northeast, I mean, the schools like Elon and High Point get a lot of students from the Northeast because they are a little less expensive and they've got some cool stuff on their campus. We're really going to give you good value. So if you're looking for a relatively low-cost private school that focuses on experiential learning and individual attention with a unique environment, you're going to be in the mountains. The outdoor programming is not something you have to do, but you can literally do all of the following either on campus or within 10 minutes of campus: skiing, snowboarding, rock climbing, paddleboarding, fly fishing, hiking, cycling, mountain biking, etc. I mean, it's all here, and even whitewater rafting. So you get the 4 seasons. And I think that, like, if you go out towards Charlotte, you know, it gets cold in the winter, but it very rarely snows. Here, it will snow. It's less snow than Connecticut, to be honest with you. And when it does snow, it doesn't come down like in great amounts, like 2, 3, 4 inches occasionally is what it does. And it snowed a lot in December and January. And after the first week of February, there was no more snow. And so the ski resorts don't like that because early March, it was 60 degrees for like a week and they can't even make the snow. And they usually stay open until mid-March. So I guess the point is you got to be comfortable with the environment. And so students from North Carolina are good with it. We get students from Colorado, from Illinois, from Washington State, from California. They're fine with the environment. We just had our move-in weekend and 3 families drove across the country from Washington State. So it's only 3, but if you have people that live in New England, especially Northern New England, this is exactly the same. And so I think that taking a look at it, even if you did business administration here, they have specializations in accounting, marketing, and finance, and all of those unique minors, and they have an entrepreneurship center. So you can get a great education because you get to really know the faculty. Our deans teach classes here. That's kind of a unique thing. I haven't seen that too often. They're usually just administrators. So when you have high level academic people, that are working with first year students, I think it does set you apart. Every small private school I've worked at says they provide personal attention and says they have small classes. And as you know, even the state schools eventually get down to small classes, but you could do the math, right? What do you want? Do you want a large experience? Then don't come to Lees McRae. If you're looking for something unique that can really set you apart on your resume, the cross-disciplinary study opportunities here are amazing because there's so many unique things. I mean, there's even an Appalachian Studies minor. You could do Appalachian history, Appalachian photography. Why would that benefit a criminal justice student? Well, there's park rangers and game wardens that are needed all over these areas, and they would rather have you major in wildlife and minor in Appalachian studies. They can send you to the police academy. And so some of our students do that out of the wildlife biology program. They minor in criminal justice too. So it gives them a really cool academic experience. So I know I went on a long answer there, but it's definitely less expensive for a private school. It's got good scholarship opportunities. The on-campus environment, the first 2 years are dormitory style. The last 2 years are either suite style or houses and cottages all throughout the campus. So it's kind of like that, growing up, you're almost having your own apartment, even though you're part of the campus housing. So there's a lot of cool things. And I think you just have to be the right person, because you can have a car here as a first year student, but if you're going to Boone, it's 25 or 30 minutes. If you're going to Charlotte, it's 2 hours. So you are a little bit off the grid, but much less so than I thought until I saw how many people were here. So again, you just got to be the right person. But it's, it's something that as we started to even talk to people in New England, they love it because it's unique majors at less cost at a smaller environment. And you can't beat if you like outdoor stuff. I mean, you can do it in all 4 seasons.
That's great. Thank you. So I think, we're coming up on an hour. I really appreciate your time. Wondering if you have any parting pieces of advice on the college process for anyone who's listening to this. And actually, let's focus this on parents, right? I think we've talked a lot about the students. You've been through this as a parent recently. What would be your best piece of advice you could give to other parents who are just entering the college selection process?
Yeah, that's a really good one, James. But I would say kind of what I did is probably the best approach. Let the students do some of it for themselves. Don't force them into it, but give them some guidance because they still need the guidance. So be there as a resource, but don't be the sole resource. And also realize that there's a lot going on at colleges. Here's a great story. So long story short, we're building a new dining hall. It actually got delayed just a little bit. So we have a temporary dining hall that looks like a hospitality tent at a golf tournament. And the students are fine with it. But yesterday, we took our students up to Beech Mountain. And so lunch was served at Beech Mountain. But one student told their parent that we weren't serving lunch. So they put that on Facebook and were complaining. But they didn't realize that the lunch was being served at the other location. And so they just believed really quickly what the student said. And that's one thing. I don't believe everything everybody says until I research it a little bit. Most colleges have considered things, and you're never going to be 100% happy, but research, because everyone has an opinion. If you had asked me, years ago when I was a student at Sacred Heart University, I didn't think much of the University of New Haven. I think totally differently of that place now, so much so that my daughter is going to school there and is successful there. Now that I'm here at Lees McRae, I would never have thought that Lees McRae is a great place. And quite frankly, another aside, Division II basketball here is Division I basketball in the Northeast. These teams are loaded. So when you go to watch, the difference is my daughter went with me a year and a half ago to the Duke Clemson game when she visited me, and she likes Duke basketball. And of course, there's 10,000 plus people there. And then the next day I took her to the Lees McRae versus Emmanuel College basketball game. And they're in Georgia at the league game. Lees McRae won that game 103-98. And the action was unbelievable. Alley-oops from half court, and our gym only holds 850 people, but it was sold out, and the noise level was through the roof. So she was more excited in that environment, stunningly to her. And I guess that's the other point, right? Just your student may have a perception, or you may have a perception of what works. I know a lot of parents who get involved, and they would even say, "Oh, Lees McRae, what's that?" Right? But that's what I'm encouraging people to do. And I'm not saying everybody's going to come to Lee's McRae, but some of my former friends and high school colleagues have actually had a couple of their students come and visit Lee's McRae. They've done a virtual event with us. And, that's something that I would say anybody's listening. We got virtual stuff too, even though we'll be open. We're going to have some virtual events this fall. You could always check it out. But I would say, even in New England, give a couple of those small schools a chance. And, bigger doesn't mean better, but sometimes bigger is better for you. And so, my brother went to UConn. I went to Sacred Heart University. So it's like there's big differences in the two schools. And today, Sacred Heart has grown, New Haven has grown, Lee's McRae is growing, but you have to be comfortable with where you are. So don't judge the book by the cover, is what I would say to the parent, and just try to let the student process it, but look into it yourself. Do some research and visit more than one school. Don't apply to more than 10 schools. There's a lot of things that I think, and these are my opinions now. All the other stuff I was telling you was factual, but from the parent side, I saw a lot that surprised me. I saw a lot that showed that what we did at New Haven and what we're doing here is really helpful to educate families on financial literacy, on the admission process, on the right fit for them. And so the summary of all of that is just guide them, because they will need that guidance and they might need a nudge occasionally. But if they get vested in the process, they'll have a better college experience. So if they've done some of the research, don't force them into the car and drive them to a school they don't want to go to. I know people do that, but if I was talking to the student, I would say, well, give it a chance, right? And so sometimes you end up at a place you least expected. And I told this to people a couple of weeks ago when we hosted some school counselors on campus. I think if you asked me in 1995 what I would be doing, I would have said coaching college basketball. If you asked me in 2010, I don't think I would have been here, right? So sometimes you end up in places that you didn't expect, but when you put an effort into it where you're vested in the process, you'll have a better experience. So that's joining a student club or an organization, getting involved if you're not even on a team. And the last thing I would say to students is, when I was in college, I just did my academics and studies and played basketball. I didn't join any clubs or organizations. I never studied abroad. I never went to a talk. I never went to a play. And that's what I regret. I think that you have a better college experience the more people you know, the more you get involved with. So parents, encourage your students to join something. They'll like it a lot better. If they sit in their resident hall room for a month, they're not going to be happy with wherever they went. So I hope that made sense.
No, thanks. And I think that's great advice for, so parents, do your research. What's your favorite source for research before I kind of summarize? Do you have one source? If you could only recommend one, what would that be that you would
That's
tell
a really
parents?
great question. Usually I can rattle off a few. I think it's really interesting when you start looking at the organizations that rank schools. I don't think that they are always correct in their rankings, but they are good sources to get some information because the data is correct. So a Princeton Review or a US News and World Report, while I don't think that the rankings really come down to opinions and things like that, but they show the wide range of schools that are there. And so I think any of those college resource guides are always a good place to look. Virtual college fairs are tough. I think that people don't realize how tough they are, because if you don't go in looking for a particular school, you're not going to find them the way you would at a normal college fair. So that's why I would probably steer towards some of those guides just to take a look through. If you're thinking of going to school in the Southeast, look for colleges in the Southeast and start checking them out. If you're really looking for a school of 20,000, then you can't look at Lee's McRae. But I would say to anybody who's thinking it's too small, think about what I referenced earlier with how many friends do you have. I think around here, it doesn't feel like it's that small because the campus is pretty big. I think New Haven's upwards of 5,000 students now. I feel like I'm on that campus when I'm here because it seems like there's activity, but we have a lot less. And so if you go to NC State, you'll get steamrolled by a bunch of people walking, because we did that one time before COVID. I mean, I couldn't believe how many people go to that school. So I think you have to experience it, but looking them up is probably the best way. You may have some preconceived notions as to where you want to go to school and what you want to study, but at the end of the day, there's probably a lot more that you don't know about. And doing a little bit of research, just comparing some schools. If you get things in the mail, I would look at them. I mean, some of them just look like the same stuff, but it's an important decision. I said, like, other than buying a house or probably just a house, this is a big investment in time and money. And I think sometimes people don't always put the right time into picking the right school for them. If athletics is your thing, that's competitive. I mean, I wouldn't have expected the Lee's McRae basketball team to be as good as it is, but it's pretty good. So, you can't just say, hey, I'm a Division II athlete. Most of the people that are listening to this are probably not. And so, finding a right fit for you, if it's a club sport, if it's a Division III sport, if that's important to you, you could walk on a Division II or a Division I team. That's simple to do. But, we have cycling here, and we've got skiing and snowboarding and rock climbing as official teams with scholarships. So, if you ski, you could get a skiing scholarship and come and compete. This weekend, the cycling team is competing against Auburn. So they're Division I in cycling. They go Tennessee, back, things like that. So I know I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but I just thought of some other things that people wouldn't have expected to hear about Lee's McRae. And doing some research would be the best way, to find out a little bit more about schools. I mean, there's all kinds of rankings and stuff like that. And I could have a whole nother podcast or talk with you about, what those rankings really mean, because they come down to opinion, and they're not coming from people who are sitting in the trenches like I've been for 28 years. So sometimes the parents will look at those rankings. I wouldn't look at the ranking. I would look at the information that's within the ranking and see if it fits what your son or daughter is looking for.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice, because I've talked to families in the past, and they come up, what's your initial list of schools? And the only thing I can figure out that's common is that they're all ranked by US News. Other than that, they're completely different schools. So kind of doing your research, looking beyond the rankings. And in some ways, the rankings, I think, have been harmful. So I think that would be a good follow-up podcast if you'd be willing to do this again, Kevin.
Yeah, no, that would be a good one, because we spent a lot of time, because people are looking at the rankings. I mean, shockingly to me, Lee's McRae shows up well on the rankings. It was number 26 out of 120 in the South region last year, so it's in the top 22%. Wow.
Yeah.
And, at New Haven, we spent a number of years trying to get into that top 50%, and I think it's interesting, because some of the data helps support what the ranking is, but 22.5% of those rankings are pure assessment. I mean, if I say that, NC State is no good, then they put that into the ranking. And I think that's what is literally clearly unfair. There's a lot of people that sit in my seat at other colleges that just are totally against US News and World Report rankings. I like it just because it shows all the schools. And if you start digging down, you get a little profile of each one. And that's kind of why I brought that up. And Princeton Review has a list too. And I know it's cumbersome, because the number of 2-year schools and 4-year schools combined, I think, is just approaching 4,300 in the U.S., somewhere in 2,700, 2,800 4-year. There's a lot. So it could be a daunting task to sit out there and try looking through them. So patience is another one thing.
Great. Well, Kevin, thank you so much. And we will have information about Lee's McRae, how you can access their website, and some other information in the comments down below. So Kevin, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we can do this again.
Yep. Thanks, James. I appreciate it.